It's strange, isn't it? How right when things start to finally fall into place, something inside you begins to quietly pull them apart. You wake up one morning feeling like maybe this time will be different. You're eating better, you're working out, you're following through. People even notice. They tell you they can see it in your eyes, that you seem lighter somehow, and you feel it too, like you're coming back to life. Then, almost imperceptibly, you start to slip. You skip one workout. You give in to one small craving. You tell yourself it's just today. And before you know it, just today turns into every day. The discipline fades, the clarity dulls, the pride evaporates, and you find yourself back where you started, only heavier with disappointment. It's like a private betrayal, a kind of heartbreak that doesn't come from anyone else, but from you. You can't even tell if you're angry or just sad. Why would you destroy what you were building? Why would you sabotage the very thing that was healing you? You promise yourself next time will be different, and deep down you mean it. But there's a quiet part of you, that still stubborn whisper, that already knows how the story ends. I used to think it was laziness, or weakness, or lack of willpower, but none of those explanations ever felt true. Because if it were simply that, we could fix it, right? We could push harder, discipline more, build stronger habits. And yet, something deeper keeps pulling the strings, something invisible, but undeniably alive. It's not the rational mind. That part is begging you to keep going. It's something else, something beneath reason, beneath understanding. A force that doesn't respond to logic because it isn't trying to hurt you. It's trying to protect you. I know how strange that sounds, that the same part of you that ruins everything good might actually be the one trying to save you. But stay with me. Think about the times you've been close to something truly different. Real love, meaningful success, peace. What did it stir in you? Excitement, yes, but also fear. Fear of losing it, fear of not deserving it, fear of being seen in a way you've never been seen before. That fear, it doesn't come from your adult self. It comes from somewhere much older, a child version of you that once learned that safety meant hiding, that being too visible invited pain, that love was conditional, that shining too brightly made others uncomfortable. That child never stopped existing. They just moved underground. And now, whenever you approach something that threatens to rewrite those old rules, they panic. They pull the handbrake. They'd rather burn everything down than face the unknown, not because they want to ruin you, but because for them, the unknown feels like death. It's wild how deeply those early impressions root themselves into us. Maybe you grew up in a house where emotions weren't safe, where being vulnerable got you hurt, or where success made people jealous, or affection was earned by being perfect. The body remembers what the mind forgets, and even decades later, when you finally reach for freedom, the old wiring still fires. Don't. It's not safe. So what do? You stall. You distract yourself. You start a fight. You pick a small imperfection in something beautiful until it becomes unbearable. You retreat to the familiar, even if the familiar is killing you, and then you call it failure. But what if it's not failure? What if it's a signal? A coded message from the part of you that you've been ignoring for years. Jung once said that the unconscious doesn't just store memories. It's alive, intelligent, and often compensates for what the conscious mind refuses to see. Maybe your self-sabotage isn't random. Maybe it's a form of communication, a last attempt by your soul to get your attention. I remember once, after a long period of burnout, I promised myself I'd finally take care of my health. For weeks, I was perfect. Early mornings, exercise, clean food, everything aligned. And then, right at the peak of feeling good, something in me started to crumble. I lost interest. I made excuses. I skipped workouts, then meals, then entire days of effort. And I remember sitting there one night, angry at myself, whispering, "Why do I do this?" The answer came years later, during a moment of quiet honesty, because a part of me was terrified of what would happen if I actually changed. If I became strong, healthy, disciplined, I'd have to face what that meant. I'd have to stop being the version of myself that others pitied or excused or underestimated. I'd have to risk being powerful. And for someone who grew up associating power with rejection or danger, that was unbearable. So I sabotaged, not to fail, but to stay safe. Once you see that, you can't unsee it. Self-sabotage stops being an enemy and starts becoming a mirror. It shows you the places you still don't feel safe to expand. It shows you where the past still governs your present. It's not asking you to fix it, it's asking you to listen. Because when you begin to listen, really listen, something inside starts to soften. You stop calling yourself broken. You start realizing that every act of sabotage carries an unspoken message. Please slow down. Please look at me. Please don't leave me behind again. And when you respond with compassion instead of judgment, you begin to notice how that tension inside you shifts, how the parts of you that used to destroy your peace start to relax. So maybe that's where healing begins. Not in more effort, not in stricter rules, but in understanding. In realizing that every time you self-destruct, it's just another part of you trying to protect something sacred, something you outgrew but haven't yet learned to let go of. It's not the world that keeps taking away what you build. It's you, but not because you're weak, because you're scared. And that's okay. Fear is just love that doesn't yet know it's safe. Maybe, just maybe, the part of you that keeps sabotaging everything isn't your enemy after all. Maybe it's your oldest friend, standing guard at the gates of your transformation, still convinced that the fire that once burned you will burn you again. And maybe it's time to gently take their hand and whisper, "I know, but it's okay now, we're safe." You know, for the longest time, I thought I could outsmart it, that if I just pushed harder, planned better, disciplined more, I could silence the part of me that kept pulling me backward. But the more I tried to overpower it, the louder it became. It wasn't until I finally stopped fighting that I began to see it for what it really was. Not a flaw, but a language, a strange emotional dialect my unconscious had been speaking all along. It's unsettling when you realize that your mind isn't one unified thing, but a community of voices, each with its own fears, loyalties, and memories. There's the one that wants to change, the one that's terrified of it, the one that still lives in the past, and the one that pretends everything is fine. They all pull in different directions, and somehow you're the rope. You get stretched between who you were, who you pretend to be, and who you might become, until you start mistaking that tension for failure. Jung said that the unconscious doesn't sabotage you because it's cruel. It does it because it learned that safety lies in familiarity, even when that familiarity hurts. If you grew up around chaos, stillness can feel unbearable. If you were taught that love comes with pain, peace can feel suspicious. The psyche clings to what it knows, even when it's destroying you. It's not rational, it's ancient. When you start seeing it that way, self-sabotage stops looking like weakness and starts to look like self-preservation. Misdirected, yes, but deeply human. It's your unconscious throwing its body across the tracks, screaming, "Don't go there. Last time we went there, we got hurt." And how could it know that you're not that same fragile child anymore? No one told it. You never did. You just kept moving, pretending you'd outgrown the pain by outpacing it. But it doesn't work like that. What isn't healed gets recycled. You think you're choosing freely, but you're really reenacting the same old script, the same fears, the same patterns, the same endings. The invisible hand behind your bad luck isn't fate. It's the parts of you you've never met. Sometimes I imagine the unconscious as a loyal but traumatized friend, the one who remembers everything you'd rather forget. It doesn't speak in logic or words. It speaks in symbols, sensations, impulses, a sudden fatigue right before a big step forward, a wave of anxiety in moments of intimacy, a vague resistance when something feels too easy, too good. It's trying to warn you, to protect you from repeating what it believes will hurt. But the truth is, it's working with old data. It still thinks you're living in the same world that once broke you. That's why ignoring it doesn't help. You can't bully your way into growth. You can't shout at your fear and call it healing. The only thing that changes it is relationship, listening, understanding, integration. There's this image Jung used once: consciousness as a small island floating on the vast ocean of the unconscious. Most of us live on that tiny island, obsessed with building better houses and stronger walls, never realizing the tides below are what shape the land itself. The unconscious isn't passive, it's alive, constantly adjusting, compensating, balancing. It doesn't care about your external success, it only cares about your internal equilibrium. So when one part of you grows too fast or too far, the unconscious sends something up from the depths to bring you back to center. Maybe that's what self-sabotage really is. Not an act of destruction, but a desperate attempt to restore balance. You chase light for too long, and the dark calls you home. You live too much for others, and your selfishness demands a voice. You become addicted to achievement, and suddenly your motivation dies. It's as if life itself is trying to keep you whole. The first time I saw it that way, I cried. Not out of sadness, but out of relief. It meant I wasn't broken after all, just out of alignment. My mistakes weren't punishments, they were signals. Every collapse was the unconscious saying, "You're forgetting a part of yourself again." I think we spend so much of our lives trying to control ourselves that we forget what we're actually trying to control. The scared, beautiful, disowned parts that just want to be seen. We think healing means eliminating them, when really it means sitting down with them and saying, "You make sense. I get why you did what you did." And that's when the war inside starts to calm. Because once your unconscious feels heard, it no longer needs to scream. Once it realizes you're not trying to abandon it, it begins to trust you. The pull of sabotage lessens not through dominance, but through dialogue. The unconscious stops fighting you when it knows you'll listen. And little by little, you begin to feel a different kind of power. Not the kind that controls, but the kind that understands. That's when change stops being a battle and starts becoming a partnership. When the parts of you that once pulled you backward begin to guide you forward. When the same hand that once slammed the brakes now gently rests on your shoulder, whispering, "Go ahead. I'm with you this time." It took me a long time to admit that I had a shadow, that hidden part of me that didn't fit the version of myself I liked to show the world. I used to think being good meant keeping certain feelings under control. Anger, jealousy, ambition, desire. Anything messy. Anything that might make me look selfish or imperfect. I built this whole persona around being kind, calm, composed. Someone who always understood, always forgave. But inside there was another me, waiting in the dark. And every time I tried to bury that part deeper, it found another way to claw its way out. The thing is, your shadow doesn't disappear just because you pretend it's not there. It leaks through your words, your choices, your silence. It shows up in envy you can't explain, irritation that feels disproportionate, guilt that doesn't belong. It lives in the people you judge most harshly and the qualities you swear you don't have. Jung called it the face you never show the world. But I think it's more than that. It's the collection of everything you were told wasn't acceptable to be. I remember one night during a long conversation with someone I cared about, I found myself saying something cruel, small but cutting. It wasn't what I meant, not consciously anyway. But the words came from somewhere older, sharper. The silence afterward was unbearable. I wanted to take it back, to fix it, to explain. But deep down, I knew that wasn't an accident. That was my shadow speaking. It's easy to hate that part of yourself. The part that ruins good moments, that pushes people away, that makes you feel like you're the problem. But I've learned that the shadow doesn't act out to hurt you. It acts out because it's starving. It wants to be acknowledged, to be seen as part of the whole. It's like a child who's been locked in a basement so long that it learned to scream just to remind you it exists. The hardest thing I've ever done is to stop running from it, to sit down with my darkness and say, "Okay, tell me what you need." Sometimes it speaks in tears, sometimes in rage, sometimes in an eerie stillness that feels like grief. But beneath it all, there's always this quiet longing. Please stop pretending you're only light. We spend so much time chasing positivity, trying to transcend our flaws, that we forget how much of our vitality lives in the things we reject. When you repress your anger, you lose your courage. When you deny your ego, you weaken your self-worth. When you bury your pain, you also bury your capacity for love. Every time you exile a part of yourself, you shrink. I've seen it in others too. The perfectionist who can't relax because rest feels like failure. The healer who helps everyone but secretly resents the people they save. The person who prides themselves on humility but can't bear being overlooked. These contradictions aren't hypocrisy. They're evidence of our split selves trying to find balance. The shadow isn't the villain of your story. It's the key. It holds the raw material of your strength, the fire that makes you alive. To deny it is to live half a life, smiling while something inside withers. But meeting your shadow isn't romantic. It's messy. It's humbling. It's realizing that the traits you despise in others are the same ones you've repressed in yourself. It's catching yourself mid-judgment and whispering, "Ah, there you are." It's facing the truth that sometimes the reason you hate someone isn't because they're wrong, but because they remind you of who you're not ready to be. Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." I used to roll my eyes at that, but now I get it. Every trigger is a mirror. Every annoyance, a breadcrumb leading you back to something disowned. The more you follow them, the more you see that the people you thought were your enemies were just reflections trying to show you what's missing. It's not about letting the shadow take over. It's about letting it exist, about learning to say, "Yes, I can be selfish. Yes, I can be angry. Yes, I want to be seen." Not as confessions, but as truth. Because only what's acknowledged can be integrated, and only what's integrated can stop controlling you. There's a moment, subtle but unforgettable, when the war inside you softens, when the part of you you've feared for so long looks up and realizes it's finally safe to come home. And in that moment, something extraordinary happens. You feel whole, not perfect, not pure, but real. And maybe that's what real healing looks like. Not becoming someone new, but embracing who's been there all along. The light, the dark, the tender, the wild. The full, imperfect spectrum of being human. Because the truth is, the parts of you you've exiled are not the enemy. They are the guardians of your aliveness. And they've been waiting, patiently, for you to remember them. Sometimes I think the most painful truths are the ones that arrive quietly. They don't crash in like revelations. They just sit beside you one day, softly reminding you of what you've always known but couldn't bear to face. For me, that truth was this. The person I kept sabotaging wasn't the adult I am now, but the child I used to be. That realization didn't come through therapy or reading or some spiritual awakening. It came through exhaustion, the kind that lives in your bones. After one too many failed attempts to fix myself, I broke down. I remember sitting in silence, unable to even cry, when something inside whispered, "I'm still here." It wasn't a voice exactly, more like a feeling. Familiar, fragile, small, and suddenly memories I thought I'd forgotten began to surface. The times I reached for comfort and was met with silence. The moments I tried to express joy or anger and was told to calm down, be good, behave. The confusion of learning that love could mean pleasing others, even if it meant losing yourself. Those early lessons don't disappear. They crystallize. They form invisible rules that govern your adult life. Don't shine too brightly. Don't need too much. Don't be a burden. Don't fail. We call them patterns, but they're more like ghosts, the echoes of a child who learned survival by shrinking. That child didn't vanish when you grew up. They just moved deeper inside, watching, waiting, making sure you never get hurt the same way again. So every time you get close to love, they flinch. Every time you're about to succeed, they whisper, "Be careful." They've been steering you away from danger for years, not realizing that the danger is long gone. The irony is cruel, that the very part of you trying to protect you is the one holding you hostage. You start to live on repeat, cycling through the same heartbreaks, the same dead ends, the same self-doubt. You tell yourself, "Why do I keep attracting the same kind of people?" Or, "Why do I always mess things up right when they're getting good?" But it isn't coincidence, it's repetition, the unconscious recreating old wounds, hoping this time, finally, it'll end differently. But it never does. Not until you stop running and look back. Because that small version of you doesn't need another round of perfection. They don't need to be fixed. They just need to be seen. The first time I truly met my inner child, I couldn't speak. I just saw them, sitting there in my imagination, knees tucked in, eyes filled with the kind of sadness that doesn't have words. And instead of pushing it away or analyzing it, I just said, "I'm sorry I left you there." That's when everything changed. I realized that my constant striving, my self-sabotage, my endless search for control, all of it came from trying to earn safety that was already gone. If you've ever felt like you're living two lives, the one you show everyone and the one that aches in private, this is why. There's a part of you frozen in time, still fighting an old battle. And no amount of achievement, love, or discipline will free you until you turn around and bring them with you. I think about that often. How many adults are just children in disguise, running companies, raising families, chasing dreams, all while a small, scared voice inside keeps asking, "Am I good enough yet?" And when life gets quiet, when the noise fades, that's the voice that echoes loudest. But healing isn't about silencing that voice. It's about listening to it. Really listening, asking it, "What do you need?" Sometimes it just wants rest, sometimes reassurance, sometimes permission to cry, to be angry, to be loved without earning it. The moment you stop trying to parent that child with criticism and start parenting it with compassion, something profound happens. The war between who you are and who you were begins to end, and slowly life starts to make sense again. You understand why you were drawn to certain people, why you repeated certain mistakes. You see how every bad decision was just your younger self trying to stay safe. You stop blaming yourself and start forgiving. That's when healing becomes real. When the adult you are finally meets the child you were and says, "You don't have to protect me anymore. We're safe now." It doesn't happen overnight. The child will test you, doubt you, sometimes even sabotage you again. Not out of malice, but because trust takes time. But each time you respond with patience instead of punishment, the bond grows stronger. And with that bond comes something extraordinary: peace. Because once that wounded part of you feels seen, you stop living like a reaction. You start living like a choice. And maybe, just maybe, that's what growing up was always meant to be. Not leaving the child behind, but finally going back for them. There's something almost poetic about the way life pulls you toward balance. How the things you run from eventually circle back and demand your attention. For years, I thought my biggest problem was inconsistency. I could never seem to stay steady. One moment I was on top of the world, disciplined, motivated, full of clarity. The next, I was spiraling, sabotaging, losing control. I saw it as weakness, failure, proof that I wasn't built for peace. But now I see it differently. Maybe it was never failure at all. Maybe it was nature, my psyche's way of keeping me whole. Jung called it enantiodromia, the tendency of things to turn into their opposite when pushed to the extreme. Too much light and the darkness calls. Too much control and chaos demands a voice. Too much giving and the soul rebels, craving to take. It's as if your unconscious, that quiet keeper of balance, refuses to let any part of you be exiled for too long. The more you identify with one side of yourself, the louder the other becomes. I used to think the goal was harmony, a steady state of calm where everything finally aligns. But maybe that's not how human beings are meant to exist. Maybe we're meant to move, to breathe, to expand and contract, to fall apart and return again. Maybe the breakdowns aren't setbacks but recalibrations, the soul's way of pulling you back from extremes. I remember once, after burning myself out chasing perfection, I hit a wall. My body shut down. I couldn't focus, couldn't work, couldn't even pretend anymore. I called it laziness at first, another failure, but deep down I knew it wasn't laziness. It was my unconscious pulling the plug. It was saying, "You've forgotten how to rest. You've forgotten that you are more than your productivity." The same happens with emotions. Suppress anger too long and it bursts out as rage. Deny sadness and it seeps through as numbness. Fake happiness and anxiety sneaks in to remind you that joy can't be forced. Everything seeks balance, everything. Even the parts of you wish would just disappear. It's strange, isn't it, how what feels like self-destruction is often self-correction? You fall apart not because you're weak, but because the parts of you you've neglected are begging to be heard. You keep sabotaging your success, not because you don't want it, but because somewhere deep down you've lost touch with what success means to you. The world told you it looked like constant striving, so you overcorrected. And now your soul rebels, whispering, "Enough." The more I learn about myself, the more I see that my so-called chaos is just life trying to bring me back to truth. Every time I push too far into an illusion, something within me breaks it down. And yes, it hurts. It always hurts. But maybe pain isn't punishment. Maybe it's recalibration. Maybe it's the body and mind saying, "You've drifted too far from who you really are." I've seen it happen in relationships too. When one person tries too hard to be the savior, the other unconsciously becomes helpless. When one holds all the power, the other withdraws it. When you suppress your needs to keep the peace, resentment builds until it explodes. Nature doesn't tolerate imbalance. Neither does the human heart. Sometimes I think of it like this: your unconscious doesn't care about your image. It cares about your integrity. It doesn't care if you look successful. It cares if you're whole. It will destroy anything that threatens that wholeness, even if it's something you love. That's what makes self-sabotage so confusing. It feels like betrayal, but it's actually an act of preservation. And that's hard to accept. That the breakdowns, the regressions, the relapses might be acts of wisdom, not weakness. That the things that ruin our plans might actually be the things saving our souls. Because what if the point of life isn't to maintain one perfect version of yourself, but to keep meeting the parts that need attention? What if every collapse is an invitation, not to start over, but to start truer? The truth is, growth isn't a straight line. It's a pulse. You expand, you contract, you move forward, you fall back. Each swing brings you closer to the center. The old you dies a little, the new you is born a little, and in between, there's that strange, sacred stillness, the pause where balance is restored. I've started to see my inner contradictions less as problems and more as conversations. The part of me that wants to rest isn't lazy, it's tired. The part that gets angry isn't cruel, it's protective. The part that doubts isn't sabotaging me, it's asking for reassurance. And the more I listen, the less I fight. Maybe this is what it means to grow, not to conquer your shadow, but to learn its rhythm. To stop forcing yourself to be all light and instead let life breathe through you in opposites. To understand that the same energy that breaks you is the one that builds you back, wiser each time. And maybe that's what balance really is. Not stillness, but the graceful movement between your extremes. The dance between your light and your dark, your strength and your softness, your certainty and your doubt. Because when you stop resisting the rhythm, you realize it was never chaos. It was always music. There's a quiet kind of turning point that happens when you get tired of fixing yourself. You stop chasing improvement like it's salvation and start wondering what might happen if you simply listened. Not to the world, not to another self-help book, but to yourself. The quiet, trembling voice that's been trying to reach you beneath all the noise. For most of my life, I thought healing meant doing, more effort, more structure, more progress. But it wasn't progress I needed. It was presence. The courage to stop running long enough to hear what my own pain was trying to tell me. Because pain isn't just a wound. It's a message. And it won't stop knocking until you open the door. The first time I really listened, it terrified me. My mind went quiet, but my heart was loud. I realized I had spent years trying to outgrow parts of myself that didn't need fixing. They just needed understanding. The anger I called toxic was really grief. The fear I labeled weakness was just love that hadn't been protected. Even the procrastination I hated was a cry for rest. I'd been trying to silence messengers that were never my enemies. When you finally stop fighting yourself, you start to see the strange logic behind your chaos. The things that break you are often trying to save you. The mistakes that haunt you are lessons written in a language your soul invented long before you could read it. And every time you fail in the same old way, it's not proof that you're broken. It's your psyche saying, "You missed the message again. Let's try this once more." I started asking different questions. Instead of, "Why am I like this?" I asked, "What is this trying to show me?" When I felt resistance, I didn't push harder. I got curious. When I fell back into old patterns, I didn't scold myself. I asked who was speaking through me. It wasn't discipline that changed me. It was compassion. Because the truth is, you can't heal a war by declaring another one. You can't fight yourself into peace. The very idea is madness, but it's how most of us live, battling our emotions, policing our thoughts, shaming our humanness. We keep trying to evolve by rejection instead of inclusion, as if we could amputate the parts of us that hurt. But the more you exile them, the more power they gain. Jung said that what you resist persists. I think he meant that integration, not suppression, is the real alchemy. When you let your emotions exist without immediately trying to fix or justify them, something miraculous happens. They start to change shape. Anger softens into boundaries, fear melts into intuition, sadness turns into depth. You begin to see that the emotions you thought were destroying you were actually doorways into yourself. There was a night when I finally stopped analyzing and just sat with my pain. No music, no distractions, no escape. I asked it, "What do you want?" And it answered in a way that only silence can, not with words, but with a sense of surrender, like something unclenching deep inside. I realized then that healing isn't about replacing darkness with light. It's about letting them coexist until they stop being enemies. The more I practiced this, the more peace I found in unlikely places, in the middle of uncertainty, in the cracks of disappointment, in the pauses between who I was and who I'm becoming. Life stopped feeling like a battle to win and started feeling like a dialogue. I was no longer trying to escape myself. I was trying to understand. That's when the sabotaging quieted, not because I defeated it, but because it no longer needed to scream. It was finally being heard. The resistance, the fatigue, the sudden pull to quit. All of it began to dissolve when I met it with empathy instead of accusation. And that's what self-acceptance really is. Not some lofty ideal, but a daily practice of listening to the parts of you that make you uncomfortable. Sitting with your pain until it feels safe enough to tell you the truth. Letting the unconscious speak without editing its words. You begin to notice small shifts. You pause before reacting. You breathe before judging. You hold yourself in moments when you used to abandon yourself. You realize that love isn't something you earn by becoming better. It's what grows when you finally stop trying to be anyone else. I used to think awakening meant becoming untouchable, free from fear, free from doubt. Now I see it differently. Awakening is learning to walk hand in hand with your fear, to let your doubt sit at the table, to stop demanding perfection from a soul that was never meant to be flawless. You don't transcend your humanity, you learn to trust it, and that trust changes everything, because once you stop trying to escape the dark, you discover that it was never darkness at all, just unacknowledged light, waiting patiently to be seen. There's a strange peace that comes when you stop expecting life to feel like victory and start accepting it as relationship, an ongoing, imperfect dialogue between all that you are. For so long, I thought healing would make me invincible, that once I figured myself out, the pain would stop, the fear would disappear, and I would finally be free. But what really happened was quieter, gentler. The pain didn't vanish. It softened. The fear didn't die. It learned to walk beside me. And that, I think, is what real freedom feels like. Not the absence of struggle, but the end of resistance. I used to chase light. Every book, every ritual, every habit was an attempt to become the version of me who was finally enough. I was so desperate to get rid of my shadows that I became blind to how much they were teaching me. But life has a way of humbling you, of breaking you open until you realize that light without darkness is just illusion. You can't be whole if you're only half alive. Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming yourself fully, not just the parts you approve of. It's the most paradoxical journey. To grow, you have to descend. To live authentically, you have to meet the lies you've told yourself. To find peace, you must first face your chaos. It's not about reaching enlightenment. It's about returning home. And home isn't the place where everything feels perfect. It's the place inside you that can hold it all, the joy and the grief, the strength and the fragility, the certainty and the doubt. It's that quiet space where your light and your shadow stop fighting and finally start talking. I began creating small rituals for myself. Not the kind that promised transformation, but the kind that helped me remember. I'd sit in silence, breathe deeply, and ask, which part of me is speaking right now? Some days it was the child who still feared being seen. Other days it was the ambitious one craving approval. Sometimes it was the tired one begging for rest. I learned not to shame them or silence them, but to let them have a voice. The more I did, the more those voices began to harmonize. There's an intimacy that grows when you learn to meet yourself this way. You begin to feel less like a fractured person and more like a constellation, different lights connected by a single truth. You belong to yourself. You stop trying to fix every emotion, and instead, you learn to feel it without flinching. You start noticing the subtle wisdom beneath your contradictions, how fear teaches courage, how anger protects love, how sadness deepens compassion. And the saboteur, the one who used to ruin everything good, changes too. It doesn't disappear, it transforms. It becomes a guardian, a signal that something inside you needs gentleness. When I hear that voice now, the one that says, "Don't go there, it's not safe," I no longer fight it. I pause. I listen. Sometimes I still fall into old habits, but even then, there's awareness where shame used to be. And awareness changes everything, because once you stop labeling your darkness as wrong, it starts revealing its purpose. What once looked like chaos begins to look like guidance. The very pain that broke you becomes the compass that leads you inward. I think that's what love really is. Not the romantic kind, but the kind you offer yourself when no one else is watching. The kind that says, "You don't have to earn your right to exist. You don't have to keep proving you're worth saving." It's the moment you realize you don't need to become more light or less shadow. You just need to allow both to coexist. And when that happens, when all the parts of you finally sit at the same table, life stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling like belonging. The world doesn't change, but the way you move through it does. You become softer with others because you've learned how to be gentle with yourself. You stop needing certainty because you trust your own depth. You stop running from pain because you've discovered it's where your truest wisdom lives. Wholeness doesn't look like perfection. It looks like honesty. It's messy, raw, alive. It's waking up each morning and saying, "I am both the wound and the healing, the question and the answer, the shadow and the light," and that's okay. Because in the end, there is no better version of you waiting somewhere down the road. There's only this, the real imperfect you, learning how to love what you once feared. And maybe that's what liberation really means. Not escaping yourself, but coming home. Fully, finally, tenderly home. There's a moment somewhere along this road when you realize you're no longer searching for answers. You're just learning to be with yourself. You start seeing life not as a problem to solve, but as a mystery to live. The striving quiets. The proving fades. You stop waiting for some final version of peace to arrive, and you begin to notice it in the smallest things. In the way sunlight moves across the floor, in the way your breath slows when you stop performing, in the way your heart softens when you forgive yourself for being human. I think this is what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation, that subtle, lifelong movement toward wholeness. It's not a climb to the top, it's a descent into truth. It's the courage to see everything, the beauty and the mess, and call it all yours. The kind of peace that follows isn't the ecstatic kind, it's the grounded kind, the kind that feels like a quiet nod from your soul saying, "Yes, you're finally here." When you stop resisting who you are, life stops resisting you. You realize the world was never against you. It was reflecting you, showing you where you were still divided. Every person who triggered you was a teacher. Every heartbreak was an initiation. Every failure was a mirror asking, "Will you love yourself here too?" It's strange. The things you used to call flaws start to look like fingerprints. Your impatience reveals your hunger for aliveness. Your fear reminds you how deeply you care. Your sadness becomes a bridge between your heart and others. You start to understand that nothing about you was ever wrong. It just needed space to exist. And so you give it space. You breathe into the places that once felt unlivable. You learn to hold yourself through the cycles, the returning doubts, the sudden sadness, the unexpected regressions. You no longer see them as failures, but as reminders that growth is circular, not linear. Every time you revisit an old wound with more awareness, you're not going backward, you're traveling deeper. The most beautiful thing happens when you stop trying to transcend your humanity. You begin to inhabit it. You notice how the divine hides in the ordinary, in laughter, in loneliness, in the tender way you reach for someone's hand without thinking. You start to feel that being alive, in all its contradictions, is not something to endure, but something sacred. And then, slowly, the saboteur, the inner critic, the wounded child, they all find their place. They stop fighting for control because they've been given belonging. You no longer need to exile any part of yourself to feel worthy. The light and the shadow sit together in you like old friends who've finally made peace. When that happens, you realize something profound. You were never broken. You were just unfinished. A mosaic still being assembled, a soul still remembering itself. The cracks, the stumbles, the restarts, they were never detours. They were the path itself. So you stop chasing transformation like a destination and start treating it as a devotion, a daily practice of returning to presence, to honesty, to tenderness. You begin to live as if your inner world matters as much as the outer one, and that simple shift changes everything. You find yourself walking slower, speaking softer, listening longer. You stop needing to be right and start wanting to be real. You stop demanding certainty and start trusting process. You stop waiting for life to begin because you realize it already has. And maybe that's the quiet miracle of it all. The moment you stop searching for who you're supposed to be, you finally meet who you are. The one who's been here all along, beneath all the striving and pretending. Not perfect, not pure, but undeniably, unapologetically whole.